Hello, Ghanaians. Very good evening to all of you, and thank you very much for joining us here on Upfront on the Joy News channel. It's a Wednesday, the 7th day of July, 2021, and what that means is that England today will be facing Denmark. I thought I should just let you know that it's live on the Joy Prime channel, also live on Doom TV from 7 p.m. And so, if you're a fan of football like I am, and you would want to know what happens to England or Denmark, make sure you don't miss any bit of it. And we are watching this in UHD 4K. It's very, important you get to watch that ultra high definition 4K, the first of its kind in Africa. Lots of things happening in the country. We know that the committee put in place by the Minister of Interior sitting in Kumasi finding out what led to the disturbances in the Jura shooting incident leading to the death of 2 persons and others getting injured. Many of you have been complaining also and have been telling us what your views are on the decision by the Committee on Emoluments for Article 71 office holders that recommended that spouses of the President and the Vice President be paid formally. And that's led to lots of controversies. We've had some members of Parliament indicating that it will be petitioning the Supreme Court, or they'll be taking the case to the Supreme Court for interpretation because they believe that First Ladies and Second Ladies are not Article 71 office holders, so should not have been included. The opposition NDC's youth wing has talked about how they also would get to the Supreme Court, and they've talked for a no salary increase uprising that they will be having across the country if that is not reversed. But tonight, our focus is on 2 issues. But first issue, because since the beginning of the year, many of you have been talking about price hikes when it comes to building materials. You've asked the question, what is happening? After all, we're told of how inflation is stable. We have a single-digit inflation, so you would expect that should not be happening. The cedi has been doing very well against the dollar, depreciating by less than 1% within the first half of the year. So what could be the cause? Yes, there's been introduction of new taxes, but these taxes have not been targeted at the building sector. So Member of Parliament for Boakye West, who is also the chairman of the Finance Committee and former Deputy Minister in charge of Finance, yesterday was in Parliament reading a statement and asking critical questions. Let me share with you the statement that he read in Parliament, because he'll be joining us shortly right here on Upfront. He says, now I rise to formally draw Parliament's attention to some unusual price developments in our markets in respect of building materials, namely iron rods, cement, sand aggregates, and other materials for construction. In recent times, there have been unusual price hikes of these items on the market, which has understandably provoked complaints from industry operators and consumers in my constituency of Boakye West and in the entire construction industry in Ghana. These price developments have triggered further hikes in building-related services such as excavation, drilling, and tiling. Indeed, I have heard complaints that even water supply to construction sites and construction labor have all become unusually more expensive. It continues that it is hard to figure out the source of these unusual price increases, and we know that Parliament has not passed any law that could have added any tax or levy to the prices of these items. The price hikes for these items predate the recent taxes this Parliament approved as part of the 2021 budget statement and economic policy. And in any event, the 2021 budget-related taxes were not on building materials and by their nature could not have indirectly affected the price of building materials exclusively. Mr. Speaker, it is a strange development that must be frontally addressed. We need to check this for the same of the construction industry, but most importantly, we need to get to the bottom of this disturbing development to ensure that it does not spread to other commodities and other industries on the market. And it's therefore my respectful view that Parliament needs to take steps open to us and our standing orders and the law to assist the country deal with this matter. And this is a statement delivered by a Member of Parliament for Boakye West, who now will be joining us shortly to have this all-important conversation. Yes, he's joined us to have this all-important conversation. Honorable Kweku Kwarteng, good evening, and thank you very much for joining us.
Good evening, and thank you for having me.
Great. So we'll come to the, measures available to you, but I just want to understand. Before you brought this to the attention of Parliament, did you in any way find out what could be the cause? Was it a case of, conflicting reports as to what really caused it, hence a decision to have Parliament to look at it?
Well, honestly, it's been hard to figure out exactly where these increases could be coming from. I have spoken with many people in the building industry, and I just don't know. I just don't know, because sometimes you have references being made to customs taxes that may have gone up, and I'm telling people I'm in Parliament. And I know that no fresh custom taxes have been imposed on building materials specifically, and therefore you couldn't have this hike almost exclusive to the building sector. And so those reasons are, I guess, not persuasive. And I also hear people say that they must be due to increases in petroleum products, which is used to convey some of these materials to where they are bought. But the fact remains, again, that these are not the only items carried with, conveyed with the help of fuel that could be affected by increases in fuel prices. So the reasons that you sometimes hear for people who try to guess where these increases could be coming from are not persuasive. And that is why I have considered that it will be helpful for Parliament to take a closer look and to ask questions of those in the industry, especially those in the supply chain, and to find out exactly what must be happening in case Parliament is in a position to do something to deal with this unhelpful development.
Now, talking about people giving different reasons, just curious whether you spoke to those within the supply chain. Yes, you've talked about how Parliament may have to speak to them, but on your own, did you speak to them, and what did they tell you?
What they tell you is that yes, these prices are going up, and especially for those who buy these items to build for people, the contractors. And they are now even saying that building related services are beginning to witness similar increase, so that because the laborer, for instance, that is working on these construction sites with this more expensive material is beginning to see the value of what they're working on go up, then they think that labor must relate to the value or the prices of what they are applying their labor to. And so contractors are now beginning to observe increase in labor hire in construction. And in fact, the day before I presented this statement to Parliament, a contractor told me that now water supplied to construction sites, because it appears that within that industry, prices are going up. We're beginning to see the price of water go up. Price of water for construction, supply to construction sites also begin to go up. Clearly, there's something unusual happening, and I think it is important that an institution such as Parliament would go into these matters and see where they are coming from.
Now, wanting Parliament to go into these matters, help us understand specifically what you would want Parliament to do and what you seek to achieve at the end of it all.
Well, Parliament has already started acting on this. After the statement was read in Parliament, the Speaker referred it to 3 committees.
Okay.
The Finance Committee that I chair, the leadership of the Works and Housing Committee, and also the leadership of the Trades and Industry Committee. Today, we have been having some discussion as to how to go about the assignment that Parliament has given us, who to call, who to invite, how to go about the inquiry, whether or not to bring the media. Hopefully, from next week, it should be clear how we're going to go about this. And then the report that we bring back to Parliament, I think should be a basis for Parliament to make a decision as to what exactly needs to be done.
And just curious, so far, I mean, in your preliminary deliberations, who are some of the people that you've considered inviting to appear before your committee to help you find a solution to this?
Obviously, manufacturers of, I would imagine, the committee has not listed those we invite yet, but I would imagine that the manufacturers of the items that are under question would be invited. Those who manufacture cement will have to be invited. Those who produce, for instance, reinforcement iron rods will have to be invited. Those who are importing these items in large quantities may all have to be invited to share their own perspectives why we're beginning to have these developments. So to answer your question more directly, I think those involved in the price buildup would all have to share some thoughts. I'm sure by the end of those engagements, we all should be able to have some idea exactly where this is all coming from.
And at the end of all the engagement, when the committee is done and presents its report, this is a report you're presenting to the executive, right?
Well, Parliament will make a decision as to what it wants to do with whatever report we'll put before them, but I would imagine that it would depend on what our proceedings will bring out. If it requires some special policy intervention, it will be within our work to make recommendations to the executive on what we have found. If it is something that Parliament could directly deal with, we will do so. But I think as to what Parliament would do would depend largely on what findings we come up with.
Some have already raised the question. Well, your party is in office. Previously, you were part of the executive. Did you have these discussions with the executive before tabling it before Parliament?
No, I didn't have to do that. And I think even though until very recently I was part of the executives, there are areas where there has to be engagement between people like me and those in executive. But I'm also sensitive to the fact that I represent the people of Obuasi West, and where they have concerns, it is important that I table those concerns at the National Assembly. If I would go and have discussions, it would be hard for people to feel that they're getting representation, and that's why we put these things in the National Assembly. But of course, we as a Parliament work very closely with the executive. We look at a lot of the things that the executive want approval for. And therefore, the engagement would continue. It is good that we've started like this. The executive may well be invited. I mean, those within the executive who may have some contribution or perspectives may well be invited to come and support the committee's work. So yes, we are working together, but I didn't think I had to consult the executive before playing my role as the representative of the people of Obuasi West.
Great, but let me just get back to, playing your role as a representative of the people of Obuasi West. So when did you realize that, the prices of building materials were going up? When did you realize that they were increasing abnormally?
A month ago, to be fair. I think initially, when we started hearing the complaints, it was assumed that maybe there's some shortage of supply, maybe something could not move in the light of COVID and all that, and that it would be a matter of time and things would get back to normal, get normal. But somehow it's not happening, and it's rather deteriorating, and we're beginning to see related services and items related to the core building materials begin to follow suit. And I am worried that unless this thing was properly investigated, and if there are steps that could be taken to deal with these developments, you could have a similar situation in respect of other goods and even services, and in respect of other industries. That is why we are having to act now. But I think, to be fair, this thing has been around for some time, and if we knew that it was going to be a phenomenon that would stay this long, we probably would have tackled it much earlier. We thought it would go away, but it isn't.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Now, since you've been in Parliament for a very long time now, since 2013, you would know the procedures better than many of us would do. Now, this committee that has been put in place, how binding would its investigations and recommendations be on the executive?
Well, it would not be binding, save that in the end, it would inform our oversight responsibilities over the executive. I mean, if there are reasons, policy reasons why these hikes are happening, and we point that out to the executive, our expectation will be that the executive would take these recommendations seriously and respond appropriately. We cannot expect that the executive would follow our orders or our instructions. The executive shouldn't do that, but we will expect that the executive would look closely at whatever we are able to put before them. But on our side, I guess what Parliament considers to be the reasons around this development would inform our approval responsibilities. I mean, if Parliament knew that, for instance, a certain relief be given to local manufacturers of, say, a certain commodity that has become expensive, is not leading to the boost in local production that we're looking for, our expectation with that policy would remove those incentives. If we have been looking to protect local manufacturers of certain items with the hope that those manufacturers would expand production and save us forex, but also make these things available to people in a process of import substitution. And it is a reason these exemptions and tax waivers have been given to domestic producers. And we are now beginning to see a situation where this is not yielding fruit. It would be for Parliament to have this discussion with the executive and to reflect these in how we look at the approval of policies that the executive will place before us. In short, what I'm saying is that Parliament itself will be guided by what we're able to find out, and that would inform not just our engagement, constructive engagement with the executive in the formulation of policies, but also it would help we ourselves to exercise the approval powers that we have been granted under the Constitution.
Great. So, talking about Parliament and your approval powers, and all, let's get to another issue, a very important one. And we'll be watching closely to know the outcome of this particular committee that has been put in place, by the Speaker to actually look at what could be leading to the hiking prices of building materials, because it gets to affect all of us. So, we'll be following up as a country that we have a huge housing deficit. If the prices are going up, it certainly would affect the prices of houses. And we'll come back and ask the question, how affordable are affordable houses? So we'll be following up to find out what happens. But one other issue that has come up in Parliament and has to do with a $28 million loan for the 275 members of Parliament. And if you do the calculation, you're looking at $100,000 for each member of Parliament for the purchasing of vehicles. And already there seemed to be confusion, or there seemed to be, this time, a consensus that maybe government should be purchasing the vehicles for Parliament. Your committee is the one looking at that particular loan. What's the decision? I mean, what's influencing all the commentary we hear in Parliament that the state should, maybe this time around, be financing the purchasing of vehicles for MPs, which they use, and if their tenure is over, leave it, and not loans anymore? What's changed?
Well, not much has changed. As far as I'm concerned, that has been the arrangement. Government secures a loan to help MPs procure these vehicles. The MPs pay a part of the loan. Government support the MPs in the payment of these loans. And it is expected that the MPs would use these vehicles in their duties as members of Parliament. And what happened, the referral to the Finance Committee, it was to be expected. It happens every 4 years when a new Parliament starts. And so we are not surprised. It's before our committee, we are still looking at it. We have not presented our report to the plenary yet. We will do so in due course. But it is true that this time, perhaps also because members of the public are beginning, in my view, and I think it's a healthy development, are beginning to look more closely at the operations of government, which is a development I consider healthy. And therefore, you're questioning everything.
Mm. And so in questioning everything, is it a case that because of these questions, you have now decided that, you know what, or some of you are making the point that, you know what, government, get it for us. And so it's no longer a case of MPs being selfish or being greedy? Well, we'll try and work. I think that there seems to be a bit of a challenge with connectivity. We'll try and get back to the Member of Parliament for Boakye West, and also the Chairman of the Finance Committee in Parliament. That's the Honourable Kweku Kwating, who this evening has been helping us understand a few things. We started a conversation on, the increase in prices of building materials. Now, he's actually, made a statement in Parliament. The Speaker of Parliament has established a committee to look into it. He says they've been trying to understand why the prices of building materials has been going up. And he says, unfortunately, even today, based on his own investigations, I mean, water for building, okay, is also going up. And he thinks that, if the government is always coming out with policies to support local industries, then you need to ask yourself, are we, implementing the right policies? If we are not implementing the right policies, then what could we do? We're trying to work, the link and get him back on the line, because we're talking about a very important issue, the issue of, the issue of MPs' loans forecast. My name is Winston Amwa, and this is UPfront on the Joy News Channel. When we return, we'll try and work the lines and get Kweku Kwating back on the line. We'll be right back. Right, so welcome back. Thank you very much for staying with us here on UPfront on the Joy News channel. And tonight we're having a conversation. We started with, the increasing the prices of building materials with Honorable Boakye, Member of Parliament for Boakye West. And we're continuing. At this time, we're focusing on the MP car loan, the vehicle loans. Yes, and he's joined us again. Thank you, Honorable Boakye, for joining us again. So you're making a point about, Ghanaians scrutinizing the, expenditure of the executive or the state. So is that why this time around, you seem to be having a change in heart, if I could put it that way?
Yes, I was making the point that increasingly the public is becoming more conscious of the workings of government. And so we're seeing a greater interest in perks and privileges of politicians generally. And so I see that in respect of the facility that the Ministry of Finance has presented to Parliament. And what that is doing is also, of course, to invite members of Parliament, and I have also heard other commentators also throw in the question of treating the MPs just like the other members of the other arms of government. And today in Parliament, in response to discussions in the media, many members were of the opinion that it cannot be that you have Article 71 office holders and they cover the branches of government, ministers, deputy ministers, and in fact, chief executive of state entities. They are not Article 71, but for the purposes of this discussion, they are in the same category, are all giving a vehicle to support their work. Most of the time they have a vehicle and a 4x4, a four-wheel drive, and a saloon car. And then they actually have a state recruited driver for these members of the executive. You go to the judiciary, you see something similar for judges of the superior courts, your high courts, judges going upwards, you see them. The question is that why have we as a country treated members of Parliament differently? And that is why today, for instance, there were strong views from many parliamentarians that on this occasion we should not accept the loan facility that requires MPs, of course, to pay, because even though government supports members in the repayment of these loans, already, even though the money is not secured, just so we will not be overburdened down the line, we're paying in excess of 6,000 Ghana cedis a month to finance the loan that government procures for the purchase of MPs' vehicles. And many MPs are very uncomfortable with that. Okay. There are many members of Parliament who, in the end, are taking home salaries that is making them question that if only the state could provide us with vehicles, then we won't have to pay this excess of 6,000 Ghana cedis a month. And then after 4 years, if you are not coming back to Parliament, you leave it, and then it's state property just as it is for the other arms of government. That view was expressed in terms that today, in terms that I've never heard in the past. So I can only say, it's not been very long since I was the deputy minister sitting at the center of government treasury. I'm still sensitive to the fiscal, and maybe the country will have to have a discussion which is cheaper, whether government should procure these vehicles for members of Parliament the same way we do for other senior government officials. And then when they are, of course, in that case, if they are if state property, then it means they would have to be serviced the vehicles will have to be serviced by the state. It will have to be fueled by the state. You need to provide a driver. If that is cheaper, why not? I would suggest that, because at this point, a lot of members of parliament want that. If, on the other hand, we consider that that is perhaps less expensive, and we will continue to ask members to accept the arrangement that has traditionally existed, we should do so. But maybe it is time to really do the numbers and see which is more expensive.
And talking about the numbers, I'm interested in the numbers. So let's start it this way. Without, I mean, we're not going to deal in specifics, but let me just have a few, and let's help our viewers understand a few things. So what percentage does government help MPs, in settling their debt? I mean, what percentage is paid by government when it comes to this loan that is used in purchasing vehicles?
It's about half.
Half. So let's say
what is before Parliament now? Maybe we shouldn't discuss it because it's part of the deliberations of the Finance Committee. But what has happened in the past is about half taking paid for by government, and then members of Parliament would take the other half.
Okay, but I mean, since you're discussing this, and already some of your colleagues have come out to say it, I don't know. Some say that this time the government will pay 60%. Is that a case?
I think so. When you put the figures all together, it may well come to something like that. I have to look at the figures again.
Okay.
And then we would because they are not straight figures like that. Okay. People make computations, so you know.
Okay. So if we're to look at it, for instance, let's use the old figure, 50%, and this year we're looking at 100,000. So you're looking at 50,000, and what that would mean is that MPs are going to be paying $50,000. Government will take care of the $50,000. And so if you have to divide that by half, it means you're looking at $14 million being borne by the state and $14 million being borne by Parliament. If we decide, for instance, that, that's minus interest, I've not, figured out the interest. But so if we decide that, the state takes care of getting vehicles for members of Parliament, we're looking at having the state bear the total $28 million, one, and also bear the cost of having to fuel it, and also bear the cost of having to pay drivers for these MPs. Now,
But just also add that after the 4 years, these vehicles would revert to the state. They will be for the state.
Yes.
And so, unlike the current situation where after the 4 years, MPs take them away.
Exactly. I'm going to come there. But after the 4 years when they revert to the state, yes, I do know that when it comes to 4x4s, they do not give it to exiting officials. And so that will be there. But the question would be, in what condition will these vehicles be? And how long will the incoming official be willing to use or be able to use this particular vehicle?
Well, it's all part of the discussion we must have. In fact, today, when the matter came up in Parliament, and they made a point similar to what you have just made, that, normally the government will, after the 4 years, the 4x4 vehicles, you would leave, but you'll be given the option to buy the saloon vehicles. Members of Parliament said, no, we don't want to buy anything. You don't want to make the discussion clumsy so we don't want to buy anything. Government should just procure these vehicles as you do for municipal chief executive, district chief executive. It's a big pool of vehicles you need to buy for all. Just add MPs, 275 MPs. You add them to the number of chief executives, district chief executives, ministers, deputy ministers. Members argued. I'm not necessarily for that, but members argued, and very strongly today, that they just add us to and just treat us like any of those people. It is not right that when agreements are bad and we are beginning to pay for excess capacity charges people are very upset with members of parliament. Why did you approve this? Why did you do that? But when it comes to what we provide for MPs to deliver the kind of quality governance we want them, or quality supervision of the executive, then we are a bit too reluctant to face the figures. I guess think at this point we must, as a country, do the figures, and maybe we should also learn from elsewhere. What is happening in other countries? How do they finance the transportation of their members of parliament? And maybe Ghana may arrive at an arrangement that is more comfortable for the public, who legitimately are interested in public expenditure. And then what arrangements are also comfortable for members of parliament, taking into account what their colleagues as district chief executive, municipal chief executive, chief executive of state institutions, ministers, deputy ministers, judges. Why is it so hard to treat MPs just like them? That is what MPs are asking for. As I said, I am still sensitive to the fiscal. And if I do the computation, and I think it will be more costly for government to do so, my advice would be, let's maintain the status quo for some time, because especially coming out of COVID, our fiscal is really tight. And if you want to add all this, it probably will be too much. But it comes back to the question, what is before us as finance committee now is the loan facility. But if we are advised to go into the options, especially given that MPs are now speaking up very strongly in favor of being treated just like any other senior state official, so that we won't have to attract this kind of public dissatisfaction and concerns over car loans and whether it's too much. That if now that MPs are beginning to call for this strongly, maybe this is the time we should do the numbers and see what we want to do as a people.
I mean, talking about so that you're not, bashed out there in the public, so that you're not criticized out there in the public. Do I get the impression that for many of the members of parliament, their decision is based on the fact that the public is consistently against the procurement of V8s, as they call it, for members of parliament through the acquisition of loans? And so you say, well, if you think this is so expensive, try this.
Well, I think, there are other social dynamics giving rise to this situation. I always say chief executives are not really elected directly by the people. And I think in the minds of many sections of the electorate or the population, they are out of our reach. We don't have control over them. They don't come to us. We vote for a president, and then the president brings us his people. These people, we have no special relationship with them. If we are unhappy with them, we complain to the president, but in any event, another president comes and will appoint a different set of people, not necessarily the people you want. So appointees are a bit outside the reach of many ordinary Ghanaians. It's the same with the executive.
Okay.
A lot of people may never have any direct relationship with even the minister responsible for their sector. But for the MP, you have constant engagement with these MPs. They are people you may have known before they became MPs. And so even if they were giving half of what other senior state officials were giving, you see it. The teacher that was with you very recently, and you were all taking public transport, maybe. Now, for qualities that that teacher may have, contest elections and becomes a member of parliament. Now, as for this man, we knew him. So even if you gave him a new saloon car, we think the gap between his previous days as a teacher and what we see now is too big, especially when those of us with whom we played around here are still in our old state. So it's a difficult situation. I don't think the MPs are ever going to win this, but I think at this level, we must disengage from the public sentiments, which may not be informed by facts, may not be informed by best practices, and actually go into the figures and ask ourselves, what are the options open to us? What are people doing in different countries? What is it that Ghana wants to do? And what is the cost to the public purse for each option we choose?
Okay, but
I think that discussion would produce maybe an outcome that everybody would be happy with.
Okay, so that's something that we'll be doing in the coming days. It's very important. I mean, you've set a very good tone for us to have a conversation on. But if you look at it, and you've talked about the DCE situation. So the DCEs, what they do is that, they have district vehicles, more or less. I have seen vehicles that were used by, DCEs in the John Mahama administration, particularly the Nissan Patrols, which were purchased, I think, in 2011 in some of the instances, still being used today. So if you're asking government to purchase vehicles for MPs, are we looking at having constituency-based vehicles? And so, for instance, if it's my constituency in Poho, for instance, says, Member of Parliament from Poho, this is your vehicle. So when you leave, the next Member of Parliament from Poho comes and uses the same vehicle. It's more of a vehicle dedicated to your office. Is that what we are looking at? Some of the conversations your colleagues are making?
I mean, we can look at all that, but I think from my experience and sitting in the Ministry of Finance, every new administration procures new vehicles for chief executives. The old vehicles used by the previous chief executives then will enter the pool of the assembly. Because it's not just the chief executive that travels in the assembly. So it is not as though they need just one four-wheel drive. You have many other officers in the assembly also traveling very long distances. So what happens is that every new chief executive comes and it's normally even procured at the center and distributed to chief executives. And then the old ones then would move into the pool, the vehicle pool of the assembly. So that's what happens. It's not as though you have successive chief executive using the old. Maybe before your new one arrives, when you are appointed, before your new one arrives, you may have to use the old one, but invariably you get a new one sooner. So I don't know what the answers will be if we choose to procure vehicles for MPs and they leave it behind when they have finished with their job, just like any other person. We may just have to learn from what happens in these institutions. You go to the state entities, the chief executive of state authorities, the NPA, NCA, the vehicles that they use when they leave, what happens to those vehicles? We may learn lessons from there, and I would imagine that if we're learning lessons and applying them, we should apply them across board. It's not very pleasant, and I sit with my colleague MPs, even when I was also the Deputy Minister for Finance, and people speak with pain. They speak with pain that this is not right. If you continue to give the impression that the MP may have to make do with something different from all other senior officials, you're going to get the kind of legislative work that you are getting from your parliament. And as I said, oftentimes we have seen very bad agreements and people shout, but the MPs, what were they doing? Maybe we should have all that discussion together. If we want quality legislative work, let us ask ourselves, what does it take to get that? What is happening elsewhere? And I'm sure as a country, we're capable of coming up with an arrangement that will not have to take the member of parliament through public criticisms every 4 years. I tell you, it is something that many MPs have very strong feelings about.
Okay.
And they just think that to cut all this out, let us just be treated like everybody else, and then we won't have this.
But this is not compulsory. The loan, it's not as if you're compelled to take it, are you?
Well, you're not compelled to take it, but if you don't, then maybe it's because, and in the past, there are people who have not taken, who refuse to take the loan.
Yes.
But if you don't take it, especially given that the government supports you with a part, it means you need to find money to procure your own vehicle. And do you want to move between your constituency and parliament? Yes. So what vehicle do you use? In the end, somebody will have to pay for that. So, I mean, if you just say you don't have to take it, and so what? You don't have to take it, and so use your own vehicle, and is that what applies elsewhere? Is that best practice across the world? Two politicians, one contest elections, and people do these comparisons. Just a quick one. You're two working in the political party. Let's say the party is fighting for power. You contest primaries and you have to fight for the election at the constituency level. You may have colleagues who, of course, are also doing part of the work. And then in the end, we have power. We say we want to govern and implement the beliefs and the manifesto that we sold to the people of this country. And then they say, well, those of you who represent us in parliament, in federals of governance, you're not going to be treated as those who never really contested elections. They never contested primaries, but they have been appointed to chief executive positions. So your mate who decided not to do politics at all, but after law school to go to the bar and subsequently to the bench. And for the period, he doesn't have to contest election every 4 years. He or she doesn't have to put up with many of the challenges that you, the MP, will put up. But the state says, it's okay. We can get you a vehicle. We can get you a driver. We can get you accommodation.
Okay.
And you retire on your salary and all that. And the MP, as for you, the MP, every 4 years, we want to decide whether or not you still have a job. And if you still have a job, you need to go to another private. And in the end, you will be the least well equipped to perform a job that we consider to be so important. And if you can't deliver well, we have the insults for you, and we have the demonstrations for you. I think as a country, we must look at all these together, learn from best practices, and see how it is that we get good people to contest and enter the legislature, and we get the quality legislative work that the country deserves.
So for you, you just want to be treated like the other arms of government. You want to be treated like the executive and like the judiciary. It's simple. You buy these vehicles.
Actually, that was a feeling today. Today in Parliament, and as I indicated earlier, because I just left the Ministry of Finance, still a bit of my fiscal instincts are still there, So anything you say, I guess go back to my days in the Ministry of Finance and see how that will fit into the budget.
And based on your days at the ministry, you think that it will be better to have a loan?
And therefore, I look at everything and then sometimes I'm not sure whether what the MPs are now pushing for, namely that treat us like every other person, is good for the public purse or not good.
Is it good for the public purse?
But the reality is that let me close on this. The reality is that, look, unless we find a durable arrangement that treats MPs just like the other members of the arms of government, this discussion is always going to come up. And at some point, we're going to have to deal with it anyway. Maybe the earlier we confront it, the better. what exactly is the arrangement elsewhere? Why is the MP treated differently? Why? Let's ask those questions, be bold, do what we think it's right. Then we can also exact more from the MPs. But more importantly, that we can hope that smart people, sometimes when I have listened to people comment on some work that members of parliament have done, and they speak almost as though these members of parliament just don't have a clue and they just do anything. And I say, why are all these good, brilliant, honest people not going to parliament? It is because it seems to me the arrangements are not attractive, and putting everything together, running elections, doing and every 4 years you need to come again. And in any case, if the state has to support you to procure a loan, you come under a lot of bashing. When you put all that together, there are many brilliant people who would be wonderful members of parliament who would never dare because they just don't like the path.
All right.
So I think we should seek to improve these conditions, not just to get the best out of our MPs, but also to attract more quality people into parliament, because the work of parliament is very, very important.
And for you, mindful of the fiscal, I mean, if you look at the options available, going for a loan or getting the state to treat MPs like other, CEOs.
I mean, off the top of my head, let me tell you, I think it would ultimately be more expensive. I am one of those who even believe that things like accommodation for state officials and all those things, we must begin to cut them out, because sitting in the Ministry of Finance, look, the amount of money that goes into the maintenance of some of these buildings that you are happy to give to public servants. You look at the cost and you're asking yourself, if I was paying all these out as allowances to these people, am I not better off?
Okay.
Now, remember, there has been a discussion here before where we said we will monetize all benefits of public servants. We never were successful in that policy. This is what informed it. So let us be careful the way we move towards getting the state to do more, when we should just decide on some money straight to people.
So finally, my question is, should the state purchase these vehicles as is done for other CEOs, or MPs should just settle for the loans?
Well, if you ask my opinion, I would say for the purposes of government making a decision, we should do the numbers.
Okay.
We should do the numbers first. And whatever is cheaper for government, we should push. But from the MP side, I am clear in my mind what happened in Parliament today, that MPs want the state to treat them the way they treat other chief executives. And that's what MPs want.
Thank you very, very much, Honorable Boakye, for joining us. It's been grateful having you join us here on Upfront on the Joy News channel. Wish you all the best. And that's the Member of Parliament for Boakye West and Chairman of the Finance Committee in Parliament, the Honorable Boakye, joining us here on Upfront on the Joy News channel. My name is Winston Amma. On behalf of the team, we're grateful you join us. Coming up next is Joy News Prime. Keep watching the Joy News channel.